The Unfair Advantage.
Okay, episode 7 of The Unfair Advantage. What a jewel. 7 episodes. I am your co-host, one of your hosts, Don Packett, and with me is my esteemed co-host, the bearded wonder, Kelvin Yonk. Hello, Kelvin.
Don, yes. Talk about that 7-year itch, right? This is actually 15 minutes per podcast. That's less than 2 hours of content so far.
I know. What a jewel.
I mean, I think the next one gives us 2 hours. But yeah, speaking of 7-year itches, I think Shaheen, our guest, had a bit of an itch that he had to scratch. Hey, Don?
Yeah. So we've got a guest on our show today, Shaheen Khatib, who has done a very interesting review of South African banking apps. Needed to scratch that itch to see who was doing cool things and who was maybe not doing such cool things. But before we go into that, Shaheen, welcome to The Unfair Advantage.
Thank you. It's great being here.
Yeah, Shaheen. I mean, we haven't met before, and you might not know the goal here on Unfair Advantage is keep our episodes to 15 minutes or less if we can. So in about like 30 seconds, tell us all about yourself and how you got here.
Oh, perfect. So I'm Shaheen. I'm head of product at a payment company. I studied accounting at Lois Stellenbosch, and I said, what can I study that will really put me at the forefront of business? In my mind, that was accounting and law. And post that 7 years, I said, look, how do I get into business? I sent out my CV so many times, and it just didn't land. At every interview, people would say, what are you doing with that accounting degree? At the law firms, and at the accounting firms, people would say, okay, but what are you doing with that law degree? And I was like, guys, I really just want to be business, and I need a foot in the door. Eventually, my sister said, look, here's this thing from the city. It's computers. It didn't have anything to do with computers. It was business analysis by capacity. It was fantastic at the time. We were the first cohort. We did some fantastic stuff there. I started out in innovation. Because of my background in accounting and law projects, I was given really the opportunity to implement all of the law projects. That was pretty awesome, and accounting projects. And really, that was the step into my journey of growing my career. And I guess my end goal is, how do I influence business to make better decisions, right? So post insurance, I joined a microcredit company. I joined the bank. When Barclays divorced their businesses from South Africa, they said, you need to get off of our systems. And I had the opportunity to really build payments from the ground up. I did some fantastic stuff in Africa. I was really happy with the product we took. We created a mobile application that really streamlined payments. So if you're familiar with Swift payments, we managed to shorten Swift payments from an average of 3 to 5 days for like 3 minutes. And that was really the highlight of my career before joining a regional Africa payments provider. Head of product there. Every decision that I make, I always ask, how do you influence, I guess, companies generally to make better decisions? Again, using my background in, I guess now almost I want to say user experience. I ask, how do you make the life of the customer easier? And now that I'm in payments, how do you make payments frictionless in Africa?
Amazing. So, okay, so it's obviously there's a big reason why you've delving into some of these things, because you've delved into it yourself, not just in the past, but currently in terms of how people use stuff, how to make things faster, better, more efficiently. And you went down this journey and I watched it over the last few weeks on LinkedIn, sharing the different South African banking apps, and you rated them over a bunch of different criterias, to see who's good and who's not so good. So specifically for these South African banking apps, why did you originally start down this journey?
I think you started the podcast really perfectly by saying Shane had an itch that he had to scratch. I'm very particular about things that look good and things that work, and also things that don't work. In my mind, when it comes to good UX can really vary quite dramatically, but it works. And so in my mind, the steps for good UX are pretty common and commonsensical, but it doesn't appear to be implemented that way. So I had reached out to the bank's customer service department to say, look, this doesn't make any sense. Please, can you look at it? And of course, those never really go anywhere. And I reached out. In fact, I even went to LinkedIn and I reached out to some of the bank's UX guys, and I said, guys, I'd really like to chat about your UX, and that never went anywhere. So look, I have a career in, again, banking and payments, and that's where I was exposed to the different technologies, and just reviewing them, I was like, this doesn't make sense at all. Please let me help you make this more seamless. And it just, I tried so hard to kind of make people aware of the decisions that didn't make sense. And unfortunately, it didn't go anywhere. And so I said, look, I think I need to scratch this itch. I think I'm in a position where if I scratch it, maybe people will listen, and maybe people don't, right? So that's always a risk you can take. You can start a series of articles on LinkedIn, and potentially people just don't read it. I guess I was fortunate that people took an interest in some of the articles. Some of the articles are not that well read either. And it looks like people are responding. It appears a couple of people are saying, look, I agree with you that banking app is not that great, and that doesn't make any sense. And maybe post this, an executive will see it. In fact, a couple of executives have seen it, and they pinged their UX guys, and the UX guys have reached out to me.
Okay.
So I said, look, I'm actually quite busy now writing one of the articles. Just give me a minute until I've completed my series, and then we can have the chat. When I wanted to have the chat, no one wanted to have the chat. So let me formulate my thoughts well enough, and then we can have the chat once I'm done with what I'm trying to say.
A man of the people. Well done.
Thank you.
Wait in line, son. So you gave Capitec's app full marks for everything, I think, and Nedbank got a measly, 1.4 out of 5 across the board. So
Yeah.
what does the Capitec app have that the Nedbank app, in your view, is kind of so sorely lacking, and any of the other apps?
Yeah, look, I don't want to I want to be cautious about the fact that I think I can see all of the apps are trying, right? Definitively, I can see Nedbank is trying to do a good job. And I want to also start off by saying that if I were rating banks on service, I'd probably give Nedbank top marks, because the service that I've received from Nedbank has always been really exceptional. In fact, I remember speaking to their agents and telling them, look, your UX is really bad. In fact, I've been telling them that for about a year. I've even tried to find out who the app developers are, and I've reached out to the app developers. I think I know who it is, but again, hasn't really landed anywhere. And so their service is really exceptional. But a couple of things that for me don't make sense is a user journey. When reviewing all of the apps, very simply, right? If apps, as an example, can do an end-to-end transactional journey in 4 screens or 4 transitions, there's no reason any other bank needs to do it in 7. You're taking the mickey, you're pulling my leg. And I'd say similarly, FNB didn't score that well either. If you are rewarding me with your loyalty to say I need to be clicking everywhere and spend more time in your app, that's really not something that I want to do as a customer. I've said this in my review, although I deleted it every time I've typed it. FNB is not Woolworths, right? Woolworths, you can argue, is a lifestyle app. FNB is a bank. I don't want to be spending time in my banking app earning rewards. I want to, if you want me to spend money, I'll spend that money and reward me for that. So I've spoken about why the apps don't do that well, and I'll speak about why I think Capitec does really well. In fact, Investec as well. And I'm happy to kind of give them that laurel, right? If that's the right word for that. Capitec, if you look at the journey, is very simple. They take the bare bones of what you're trying to do, and they really reduce the amount of steps needed to do that. And whenever if I were designing a user journey, I always ask, what are the least amount of steps that I need to do to do this? And someone, I can't remember who said that, perfection is achieved not when you've added things, but when you've removed all that you can remove. And probably someone on the podcast that listening is going to know who that person is. That's really what I'm looking at. And if I can, the more things that I can remove from your experience, I guess the lower I'm rating you. And there's just so many unnecessary complications on the apps that I've scored low. And if I look at Capitec, there really isn't. It's almost as simple as it can be. Definitively within new features, I'd probably say, you probably need a bit more thinking around that. But that's true for any new technology or new feature that you bring to market.
I'd noticed that Standard Bank wasn't on that list. You obviously didn't get a chance to include them. Have you do you have an opinion on where they would potentially sit on that list?
I have a very strong opinion on that. And again, this is recorded. Look, I want to believe that Standard Bank are trying to do a good job. So the one app that is pretty, I think, admirable for trying to do this, which is Standard Bank, they allow you to register an account without actually having a bank account for them. So I've registered with Standard Bank. However, the onboarding journey is pretty atrocious. So I've not actively shared the Standard Bank review because I haven't been able to onboard. Their service is also not that great. I've tried to open an account with them for over 6 months, and I've reached out to them. I've emailed them. On service, if I were rating Standard on service, I'd give them a 0. For the onboarding, which I've not specifically rated, I'd also give them a 0. So my first bank account about 20 years ago was Standard, and Standard was pretty great as a first bank. It's my father's bank, it's my mother's bank. But that 20-year journey from memory, and my memory is not that great, right? It was 20 odd forms that you had to sign and triplicate and I don't know, get a witness. If you look at the digital onboarding journey of Standard Bank, it looks like they've taken that journey 20 years ago with 20 pages and they've just said, you need to make this digital. And someone made a decision and someone said, okay, all of this paper forms, I've digitized it. And that's exactly the journey that they give you. And I was shocked as a customer to say, this is probably one of the worst onboarding journeys I've ever seen. So I'm not rating the onboarding journey, but if I was, that would be 0 out of 5. And I don't actually give anyone a 0. The lowest you can get is a 1. But for Standard, I'd make an exception. I'd say Standard, this is something you need to urgently look at.
Okay.
It is amazing how it's just a standard human thing that it's the shortest path to success. That's all we want. Yet we try and create these crazy things. I remember the story years ago about this a university. There was a new block that was being built, and then the guys were asking the people, where should we put the paths? And then one of these guys said, don't put any paths. Let the students just walk the paths, and then where the grass is run out, build a bloody path there, because they'll find the shortest paths, and then we just don't make them do things that they're not going to do anyway. So, yeah, it's a human nature. Yeah, anyway. Shaheen, thank you so much. To close us off, in short, what is the one thing that you think all companies, whether it's fintech or whatever, all companies who are building applications, what should they do to make the customer experience the best that it could be?
Look, again, so Amazon uses this methodology, right? And it's start with the customer and work back from there. If you were the customer and objectively you should be, right? There's a concept in development and design that says eat the dog food, right? So you kind of, before you serve that to your dog, make sure you eat it even if it's rubbish. You need to think about what would you be happy with. I look at a lot of the banks and they kind of try and sell you things, or they are trying to complete metrics and KPI that look good for, I don't know, the shareholder potentially, or for loyalty and rewards. That's not really what's going to make the customer happy, right? Obviously, you want to incentivize the customer into a win-win relationship, but it's a very fine line. As a customer, we want the shortest path. We want frictionless payments. We really want things that make life better and easier for us, not for the bank. The customer is the goal, not the banking app, not loyalty, not time spent in app, etc. So what would a good customer enjoy? And that's what you need to build.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Shaheen Khatib, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you joining us on episode 7 of The Unfair Advantage. Kelvin Yonk, thank you again for just making this better.
Thank you, Don Packett. Shaheen, amazing work. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate you. Cheers.
Have a good one.
The Unfair Advantage.